Coming up on this week's Ask GC Anything, how much power are you losing through your drivetrain? Is it more aero to be on the hoods or on the drops? We've got some team time trial technique tips, which is a little bit of a mouthful. Why is the final day of a Grand Tour a bit of a procession? And is it normal to be constantly hungry when you're doing a lot of riding? You know the drill by now. If you want to ask a question ready for next week's show, just leave it in the comment section just down below or on social media using the hashtag TalkBack. Or to put yourself in with a chance of winning 3-month subscription to Zwift, use the hashtag AskGCNTraining. Straight on now then with the first question, which comes in from Stephen Reeves. Are hub-based power meters more accurate to our actual wheel power? In motorcycles, for example, there's generally a 12 to 15% loss in power when measured from the crank versus the rear wheel. So a motorbike with an advertised 200 horsepower is only giving about 178 horsepower, propelling you forward. So if someone is putting out 300 watts as measured by a crank-based power meter, is the wheel only feeling 260 watts? Well, it's not quite that bad, but yes, you're on the right lines there because there is a loss through drivetrain friction and inefficiencies. So modern bicycles apparently have a variation in efficiency of between 93 and 98%. Which is a wide variation. So to use your example of 300 watts at a crank or pedal-based power meter, at the rear wheel and actually driving you forward, it's only going to be 279 to 294 watts. No wonder then that pro teams are putting so much effort into making their bikes as efficient as possible in the modern era. Because for someone like Marcel Kittel, for example, who's putting out close to 2,000 watts in a sprint, if his bike is 97% efficient, he's losing about 60 watts, which is roughly my sprint power at the moment, so that is a hell of a lot. Now, there is a lot you can do to improve the efficiency of your drivetrain. A big one is using a brand new chain versus an old, worn out and slightly stretched one. However, apparently the grease that comes with new chains isn't the most efficient, so you need to degrease it and put some better lubrication on. And that's another one. The type of lubrication you use can also make a big difference. Friction Facts have done a lot of research into this, and you'd be surprised at how much difference there is between the best and the worst lubrications. Chainline is another big one. Now, you often see pros these days using a 58 tooth chainring or even bigger for some of the individual time trials. That's not because they're cruising around on 58 by 11, but rather it means they're spending more time in the middle of the cassette with their chain at the rear wheel, which means that the chain line is straighter and therefore their bike is more efficient. Then there's other things such as the jockey wheels and also the bearings in the bottom brackets, etc. Plenty you can do then, but there are always going to be limitations with the traditional bike design, with the chain rings, the chain, the jockey wheels, the cassette, etc. So Ceramic Speed, whose mission is to make bikes more efficient, have completely redesigned the drivetrain. There was a prototype on show at the Eurobike show very recently, which Si caught a glimpse of. You can take a look at that video now, but I'd like your opinion because I know this is a slightly controversial subject which did split opinion widely. Is this the future of drivetrains?
This has completely blown me away. Their goal was to create a bike that's 99% efficient, and they reckon that they've done it.
Nick Lilac, you are our winner this week of a 3-month subscription to Zwift. This is the question that Nick sent in last week. When riding with my buddies, I seem to blow up on long uphill stretches of road. Not talking alpine climbs, but the ones where you really need to slog it out. How can I use Zwift to improve my performance on this type of terrain? Hashtag AskGCNTraining. Well, this is in fact a really good example of how you can use indoor training on Zwift to improve your outdoor performance and therefore enjoy your outdoor riding a bit more. We're going to assume here, Nick, that you're talking about hill climbs that are of a duration of upwards of 3 minutes. Most people can get over 1 to 2 minute climbs by getting out the saddle and going into the red and just about hanging on with the people they're riding with. Once you go over 3 minutes though, you're into VO2 max effort type of territory, which is when it gets a lot harder. So we've got 2 workouts for you focused on VO2 max types of efforts. The first one far more structured than the second, and as such, you can use Zwift Builder for this. It allows you to input the exact structured workout into Zwift and then you can follow along to it. This is another one, in fact, where using erg mode is going to be a real advantage to you. Now, we touched on this briefly last week, but erg mode means that your smart trainer ensures that you're at the right power, the right cadence, for the right duration. It takes all of the guesswork and thinking out of it so you can just concentrate on pedaling the bike. So with this first workout, what you want to do is get a really good warm up in, at least 20 minutes. Then you're going to do 5 VO2 max intervals. Now the key to this one though is that the duration of those intervals lengthens as you go through them. So for the first one, you do 4 minutes at your VO2 max, take 4 to 5 minutes recovery between each, and then add on 30 seconds in duration to each of the intervals, so that the fifth and final one is a total of 6 minutes. It's a really tough workout, but if you judge things right and pace things right, you should be able to get through it. The second one is far less structured. It's like riding outdoors, but indoors. Doing repeated hill climbs, in fact. So on the various Zwift worlds, there are plenty of climbs to choose from. There's short ones, very punchy ones, right the way up to Alpe d'Huez Zwift, which for me personally would take me about an hour at the moment. What you want to do here in the initial phase of your training is find a climb that takes 3 to 5 minutes to get up, and then just do it on 5 occasions. Now what you can do is use the U-turn function on the Zwift, either using the icon that's on your app or by using the downward arrow on your keyboard. Go up the ascent at a cadence of 85 RPMs, get to the top, do the U-turn, ride back down the other side very easily, and then turn back up again and do that 4 to 5 times. As I said, initially choose a 3 to 5 minute climb, focusing mainly on your cadence rather than your power. Ideally, you want to be doing more power on each of the ascents, which means you need to start relatively steady, but this one is all about focusing on the cadence and staying in the saddle, and that should help you in the scenario that you described outdoors. What you can do though, as I was about to say, is increase the duration of the climb in Zwift as the weeks and months progress. So start with 3 to 5 minutes. Eventually, after 12 weeks of training or so, you should be able to do 4 to 5 efforts on a climb that's 8 to 10 minutes in duration. And once you get to that point, I've got a feeling that when you go out riding with your buddies, your performance is going to be vastly improved and you're going to enjoy it a lot more. Let us know how you get on, Nick, in the coming weeks with that, and whether it improves your performance or not. Be very interested to find out. It's now time for the slow fire round, which is what I've renamed it to for when I'm presenting Ask GC Anything. First up this week from Andrew Chalk, who sounds a little bit angry. When did all this last day procession on a Grand Tour malarkey start? I don't remember it back in Big Mix Day, or am I wearing rose-tinted Rudies? Possibly, yes, because it has been around for quite some time. I'm not sure when all this champagne drinking and celebrations in front of cameras started exactly, but what I do know is that they've used the Champs-Élysées for the final day of the Tour de France every year since 1975. However, there have been a couple of notable years where the lead has changed hand on the final day, and it's no coincidence that those years finished with a time trial. The most famous, of course, was 1989, where Greg LeMond overcame a deficit to Laurent Fignon to take the most famous finish ever. 8 seconds was his advantage in the end over the Frenchman after that final day's time trial. But it also happened in 1968. There was a 55-kilometre time trial that year where Jan Janssen managed to overcome the Belgian Herman van Springel on the very last day of racing. Breakaway successes on the Champs-Élysées are few and far between. In fact, the last time it happened was Alexander Vinokourov 13 years ago already, where he upset the sprinters. Does this tradition need to change? Quite possibly, yes. At the end of the Vuelta that finished on Sunday, Spanish television released some figures, and the last day's processional stage around Madrid, I think, got less than half the viewers of the next lowest stage viewings, if that makes any sense to you. So it might be time for a rethink. The Giro d'Italia does change things up a bit, and you might remember that last year, Tom Dumoulin overcame his deficit to Nairo Quintana on the very last day, and I'd imagine the viewing figures for that were somewhat better. That said, I know that riders love sipping champagne and having an easy day, so you might get a struggle from them. Next up from Mark Hagan, I'm curious, has a country ever swept all 3 Grand Tours in the same year with different riders? No is the very short answer. That's a new record this year. 2 countries have previously won all 3 Grand Tours in the same year, but with the same 2 riders. So it happened in 1964 with the French riders Jacques Anquetil and Raymond Poulidor, and again 10 years ago in 2008, but it was Carlos Sastre who took the Tour de France and Alberto Contador who took the other 2 Grand Tours that year. So never by 3 separate riders. This one from Bug Boy. I'm a new road rider and recently upgraded to a beautiful Canyon Air Road. I live in Vermont, USA and can only pedal indoors during the winter months. I only ride for fitness and having trouble deciding if it'd be okay to get a decent set of rollers or should I drop the extra dollars on a turbo trainer. Well, with most rollers, there's not much in the way of resistance. So when I was pro, for example, when I was on rollers, pedalling in 53 by 11 at about 100 cadence. I think yielded a power output of around about 300 watts. At the time, that didn't sort of return much in the way of training gains because my FTP was 370 or so. As things are now, that probably would be a VO2 max session. So it kind of depends on your own fitness, but if you really want to do structured workouts, I'd personally say an indoor trainer the whole way. It's going to allow you to get far more power output out. Next up from Tash. I ride to school every day and I only stop aching at the weekend. I started riding about 6 months ago. I always push hard on my ride. When will I stop hurting? Well, if you're always pushing hard, you're probably never going to stop hurting. I think Greg LeMond was the man that said, it doesn't get any easier, you just get faster. So your time to school is going to reduce, but if you're riding at 100%, you're riding at 100%. If, however, you choose to go at the same speed to school each and every day, you'll probably get fitter and therefore you will find it slightly easier. What I might suggest to you is that if you go easy on the Wednesdays, you've got like a mini recovery ride midway through the week. 2 hard sessions on Monday and Tuesday, Thursday and Friday another 2 hard sessions, a recovery on a Wednesday and at the weekend. Job's a good one. Next up, this from The Inquisitor. Polarized or threshold training model. I heard base training is more beneficial towards pro cyclists in order to cause a physiological change, increased mitochondrial density, which would be less effective for amateur cyclists as we don't spend enough time on the bike. Does that mean for an amateur to be more efficient in training, we should focus more on threshold models, high intensity training, FTP, etc.? I personally say yes. There's definitely a benefit to doing the big volume, but most people, quite frankly, don't have the time to do that volume unless they are a full-time cyclist. So if you're fitting your cycling in around a full-time job or education, family, etc., etc., you're going to reap more rewards from doing a high intensity focused training program. And for your endurance, you can do 2 hours straight at like sweet spot or tempo, which really helps. In fact, I used that myself a couple of winters when I was feeling lazy and didn't want to put the volume in. Ewan Munro asks, in a couple of weeks I'm taking part in my first TTT with my club mates at the Scottish Championships. I'm not the fastest of the 4, but hopefully not the slowest. Do you have any tips for how to gauge my efforts on the front? Well, my tip is the same, however good you are compared to your other teammates. When you're on the front, you want to swing off before you've gone too deep because there's another effort to come after that, because when they come through, you slow down and therefore you have to accelerate to get back up to the same speed to get onto the back of the train and start your recovery process before you hit the front again. So don't go really deep, otherwise you might struggle to get back onto the slipstream in the first place. Now the key thing with team time trials is to make sure that the speed is relatively constant. So the strongest riders shouldn't be coming through and increasing the pace by 5 k's per hour. They should be doing longer turns, and the weaker riders, the same speed but shorter turns. What you will generally find in team time trials is that the ones that feel nice and smooth but a bit easier are actually faster than the ones where it's really ragged and you've gone straight into the red at the beginning of the event. Next up, this from Brian A. Dan, what's the etiquette during a pro tour? Can a rider accept nutrition or water from an opposing team? Yes, and it happens quite regularly actually. The teams do tend to help each other out. There's quite a lot of sportsmanship there from that point of view, especially if the swan you're standing on the side of the road has been with that rider at a previous team. They might choose to hand them up a bead on if they're desperate for one. It will also happen from the team cars as well. In terms of outside nutrition and drinks, etc., you won't normally find any of the pro riders accept a drink from a member of the public to actually drink, just in case it's contaminated. So generally when you're watching, what you'll find is if they take a bottle from the side of the road, it's literally to douse their head with and try to cool themselves down. That's it for the questions in the slow fire round this week, but we've now got a poll. There was quite a different viewpoint in my answer last week on whether you should wear socks over or under your leg warmers. So let's get this settled once and for all. There's a poll on the screen now. Let us know what the etiquette these days is, because some of the younger generation didn't appear to agree with what I said. I still think socks under leg warmers, but don't let me sway your vote. The next question is all about aerodynamics, and it came in from Clifford Romina. I always watch GCN videos about riding fast and or aero, and I noticed that you guys often use the hoods instead of the drops. Why is that? Well, for me personally, Clifford, it's because I felt like I was more aero in that position. Not the most scientific, I know, but I did have some reasoning behind it, and that's because I ride quite a slammed position, i.e. my bars are pretty low at the front end, and therefore I could get my back flat with my hands on the hoods and my elbows at 90 degrees. And secondly, with my hands on the hoods and elbows at 90 degrees, it of course means that my forearms are out of the wind too. Whereas even further down on the drops, what I would find was that once I'd got my back flat, my arms were still reasonably extended, and so quite a lot of my forearms were exposed to the wind. That said, out of the saddle I would always sprint on the drops, because when you're stood up and you're a bit higher up, it's quite hard to get you back into a flat position when your arms are extended on the hoods. That said, if you haven't got a slammed position, your bars are quite a lot higher at the front end, you're probably going to struggle to get your back flat with your hands on the hoods, and therefore for you, it's probably going to be more aerodynamic to have your hands on the drops, because the main thing is always to get your back and your body out of the wind as much as possible. It does seem like I might have been getting things wrong though, if this advice from an aerodynamics guru over at Zipp is anything to go by, because Si was picking his brains on this very subject a couple of years ago. You can find that video here.
There is quite a big difference between the hoods and the drops. That'll save you up to 20 watts if you get low enough. So in race scenarios, drops are always better.
It's time for our last question now, and it comes in from Robert Repka. I wonder whether it's normal being super and insatiably hungry, even binge hungry, the day or two following several days of riding. However, those days of riding were well fueled and not fasted. Is it something that's experienced commonly, for instance, among the professional riders? Well, I would say yes, it's very normal to be very hungry for a couple of days after a lot of riding, because your metabolism is revved right up. So to give you a personal example, there were plenty of times when I was riding full time when my brain would never tell me that I was full up. I was constantly craving a little bit more, to the point where you eventually have to say to yourself, I've probably consumed enough calories to replace what I burnt today. So it's a difficult one. Personally, I've got quite a good internal hunger suppression when I'm not doing too much. So for example, in the 3 weeks I used to take off at the end of the year, or at the moment when I'm not doing too much in the way of bike riding, I'm not generally that hungry in between my 3 main meals of the day. Other people I know do struggle with that, so it's a real fine balance between making sure that you replenish what you've used and not overeating, because even when you're exercising a lot, there is the chance of putting it on weight, and some riders even manage to do that during grand tours. What is really important though is that you do adequately fuel your recovery, because if you don't, your training and your racing is really going to suffer. We did do a video on this a couple of years ago on how to use nutrition to improve your recovery, so that might be something that you want to watch now.
A normal balanced diet is going to be sufficient to allow most of us to recover from the riding that we do in order to carry on with our normal lives. But the harder you train, or the more stressful your life, the more you might want to consider certain aspects of nutrition to make sure that you are recovering optimally.
That's all for this week, so I shall do a ceremonious closing of my laptop. Don't forget to leave in the comments below your questions for next week's show. Give this video a like if you have enjoyed it. I've got another video that you might think is relevant to you now. If you'd like to know how to improve your drive terrain efficiency, we have got a video on that very subject, and you can find a link to that just down here.